Thank you for inviting this seminar. My name is Hiromi Moriguchi. I'm an assistant professor at Toshisha University. I will now give a presentation on the theme, How to Support Parents at the Turning Point of KOBANARE from their son or daughter with a disability, through the episode description method. First of all, KOBANARE refers to the mentality of a parent whose son or daughter has become an adult and independent, or it means parents' ability to let go of their children. I have been doing research on handicapped people's support with a focus on their family problems. Among these problems, aging is an important issue. Traditionally in Japan, some handicapped people had lived at institutions, and the others had lived with their family. After 1981, the International Year for Disabled People, when UN wanted to create awareness for handicapped people, handicapped who live in the region independently have increased bit by bit. But these days, many handicapped people are living with their parents, especially intellectual handicapped people. In Japan, approximately 290,000 handicapped people who live in the region. Among them, 70% live with their families, and many are being cared by their families, especially by their parents. The problem is as follows. When their parents get old and can no longer take care of them, the handicapped individuals also get old themselves. Therefore, there is a tendency for their parents to want their child to enter an institution, because they thought it is difficult for their aging son or daughter to adapt the new independent lives. If the offspring can tell their parents that they want to be independent and move out, there will be no problem. However, if they are people with severe intellectual disabilities, their parents have to decide where or how their children will live. Therefore, the way to KOBANARE has become an important issue for the parents. In the background of the problem of KOBANARE, some cultural matters also exist. According to research, more young adults live with their parents in Japan than Western countries, regardless of whether or not they are handicapped. In other words, the culture of leaving their parents when they become adults is not widespread in Japan. I think this is the reason why there isn't an English word for KOBANARE. The Japanese young adults only leave their parents' home when they have to move away for work or marriage. In the case of people with severe intellectual disabilities, it seems to the parents that they will continue to live with them for a long time in the future, even if they are already adults. When the handicapped people have an opportunity to leave their parents and become independent, some of these parents are distressed because they feel that they have lost their son or daughter. I will introduce one of these parents named Mrs. A. She was planning to live with her severely handicapped daughter T for a long time. However, she decided to give her daughter a chance to be independent due to the opening of a care home nearby. Although she made that decision, she suffered during the process and thought that her daughter was unfortunate because she couldn't come home. By the way, this interview survey was created in order to clarify what kind of support would be necessary for helping parents to reduce their suffering during KOBANARE. I adopted a method called episode description by Kujiraoka as the analysis method. I will explain the method. In the first step of this method, the researcher describes the impressions and questions left in his or her mind during the episode. Next, he or she describes the meaning of the episode, the reason why he or she has depicted such an episode, and inquires about the thought process on their background. This analysis method is a method that describes this researcher's awareness rather than analyze the episode. I will introduce two episode descriptions in Mrs. A's interview here. I asked her how the relationship with T had changed after moving to the care home. Her answer was as follows. How has it changed? Well, after I got used to the situation, I felt that we were one step away from the close relationship that we used to have while we were living together. I feel lonely, and I feel the same for her other siblings. I feel the same for all of them. Her answer was out of my expectations. The above is the first step. Next, I will describe the meaning. I did not expect such a response because I had a bias that if you compare parents who have handicapped children with parents who don't, it is more difficult for parents who have handicapped children to go through KOBANARE. Therefore, their distress have to be reduced. Through the narration of Mrs. A, I understood that the changes in the parent-child relationship when they had to live separately and her loneliness are the same as for the siblings who are not handicapped. Thus, I began to think my bias was incorrect. From then on, I thought more about it and began to wonder whether or not the distress of parents with KOBANARE needs to be reduced. Next, I will introduce the second episode. I asked Mrs. A what was the best thing after T moved to the care home. Mrs. A answered, T's new life is not same as what I expected. She has entered a new world and enjoys it there. I am really happy about that. It's a new world that is different from what we established. I felt her last narration was spoken confidently and that Mrs. A was able to confirm the meaning of distress in KOBANARE. In other words, she was able to confirm that distress was part of the valuable process for T to enter a new world. The above is the first step. Next, I will explain the meaning of the episode. In Mrs. A's narration here, despite her prediction and intention, T formed relationships with other people. In those new relationships, she has been accumulating her own experience, which was not a situation created by her mother. Thus, T has been expanding her own world. In the first episode, Mrs. A said she felt lonely, but in the second episode, she said she felt very happy. Through these narrations, I began to think that Mrs. A's distress of KOBANARE doesn't necessarily have to be reduced. I began to think that even though KOBANARE is painful, it is meaningful for parents. In this way, researchers describe their emotions which were welled up inside while they were conducting and analyzing the interview. They can deepen their own understanding of the situation with their own feelings and awareness through the episode description. The conclusion drawn from Mrs. A's interview is as follows. I conducted a survey in order to reduce the apparent distress of kobanare. However, through the first episode description, I began to think that kobanare is associated with distress, no matter if the child is handicapped or not. Through the second episode, I realized that the distress of kobanare does not have to be reduced, but it is important to be able to think that even though kobanare is painful, it has its meaning. Parents at the turning point of kobanare may need some support not to reduce their pain, but to find the meaning of the pain. Regarding the support of handicapped people and their families, we tend to consider how we can get rid of their distress. In addition to that, we, including researchers, also have a bias and think that handicapped people and their families are special. It is certainly important to think about how to reduce their distress. However, at the same time, it is also important for us to question our own biases about being handicapped or getting older. Finally, I will explain the conclusion of this presentation. Kobanare is one of the critical phases in life. When we consider aging, it is important that how we interpret our critical phase in life, such as illnesses, aging, and death of people who are close to us. Illnesses and aging have a negative aspect, but I wonder if they really have to be interpreted as negative things. I think by looking carefully at the distress, maybe other realizations and learning can be made. Through the interaction between the narrator and researcher, some meanings such as realization and learning could be created. At the same time, maybe it will become possible to find positive aspects of aging. In the method of episode description, the researcher describes his or her own subjective world. Simultaneously, the researcher considers his or her own sense of value and theories. Therefore, I believe that this method is an effective way to attempt to change the value of aging.